Rise of the Third Power is a good video game. It is a game clearly inspired by the Super Nintendo classics, and it wears that inspiration on its sleeve. If you're a fan of Japanese role-playing games, you can expect to find many features that will quench your thirst for a classic quest. You will be subjected to charming sprites, witty dialogue, wacky beasts, challenging quests, endearing characters, numerous towns, dungeons, treasures, secrets, levels, and a large sprawling overworld. While succeeding in giving classic RPG lovers a hearty helping of nostalgia-baked goodness, the game also does its own thing. In some ways, it's a resounding success. In other ways, it falls short. But overall, this is a very well-made video game, and it's an impressive achievement based on its very limited development team. And it is a good quest. But is it a great quest? What is a great quest? What separates the good quests from the ones that leave an indelible mark on your heart and soul? Not unlike man's search for the meaning of everything. This is probably a question that doesn't have a clear-cut answer. After all, the enjoyment of art is subjective. One man's trash is another man's treasure. Having said that, there must be some common elements that all of the greats have. Hopefully, by the end of this video series, we will find them. At first glance, Rise of the Third Power certainly looks like the 16-bit giants that inspired it. And there are definitely some things that this game does very well. The character interaction dialogue is top-notch. Evelyn Rose Hall, who wrote the story and dialogue, should be commended for these interactions, as these are some of the highlights of the game. I've always been a fan of story events using in-game graphics in JRPGs, ever since the first time I encountered them in a little game called Final Fantasy II for the Super Nintendo. Me and my bro used to call them, quote-unquote, cool parts. Cool parts were one of the main reasons I ever fell in love with the genre. Seeing little characters act out these dramatic scenes was like a revelation to me. Final Fantasy IV and its use of theatrics was groundbreaking at the time. It is said that Final Fantasy IV game director Takashi Takita aspired to be a theater director. Instead, he crafted some of the most memorable scenes ever performed by super deformed sprite guys, and inspired a generation of Japanese role-playing games to follow suit. But I digress. Rise of the Third Power has cool parts in spades. The event planning, direction, and dialogue is great. It doesn't hurt that the characters in these scenes are charming and likable. By the end of the game, I really started caring about them. The ending even got me feeling a little emotional. For a man with a frozen cold heart of stone, this is no easy feat. Rowan, who is your de facto main character, is definitely a standout. A pirate with a conscience, I really started to feel for him in his struggles. This game does not shy away from some very serious and adult issues, from death to betrayal to sex to blood. It has a mature story it wants to tell, and it succeeds in doing it pretty well. Rounding out this tale of war is an ensemble cast of video game heroes, all with their own struggles and motivations. There's Karina, Rowan's partner in crime, another reformed bandit who has found purpose amidst the ranks of the resistance. Ariel, a captured princess trying to come to terms with her new role in the conflict after having lived a sheltered life of royalty. Reina, a priestess who shares a past with Rowan and is a bit of a three-way love triangle with Rashim, a general from the desert kingdom of Tariq who also happens to be bisexual and married to a man. And then there's Aiden, a dark mage whose sister leads the forces for the evil empire of Noriskov, Gage, prince and heir to the throne of Noriskov, and Natasha, who I never really used and can't remember much about. I think she's like an assassin or something. You'll follow these characters on a journey that is, for the most part, pretty good. I was engaged the whole way through. It doesn't hurt that the game doesn't overstay its welcome, clocking in around 30 hours or so, which, as us JRPG hounds know, is not very long for the genre. After a dramatic kidnapping to open the story, the opening was really well done by the way, Rowan and crew find themselves on the run, covertly trying to stop a war that seems inevitable. The game uses World War II and the instability in Europe between the Great Wars as an inspiration, and although the connection is a very loose one, it still is an interesting setup. The story loses some steam near the end, where it seems like things wrap up perhaps a little too quickly, mixing the fact that the last boss was not what I would call an epic last boss, and the fact that the ending is somewhat a setup for a sequel that we may never see. And I can say with confidence that the story is good, but definitely an aspect that falls short of great quest material. As I touched on before, Where the game really shines is in character interaction and event cutscenes. I think this is probably where Rise of the Third Power is the strongest. It goes without saying that if a game hopes to be a great quest, it must have an interesting world to explore. This is another area where I think the game hits the mark, or at least it almost does. I really love the overworld and the size of the map. There are so many towns and dungeons to explore and traverse, along with some secrets to boot. There are even places on the map that I couldn't reach and I never figured out how to get there or explore them. Clearly inspired by the SNES classics, it stacks up well against them. Well done, Stegosoft. The dungeons themselves are also fairly well designed and lengthy, which is most certainly a feature I look forward to when I take a bite out of a corny quest cupcake. You know Daddy likes his dungeons. I have to mention that most, if not all, have this weird gamey puzzle aspect where you have to find 3 separate keys to gradually progress through them. First, it bothered me a bit, as this aspect doesn't really exist in any context of the story. It's just sort of there as a gameplay element. I got used to it though and found the dungeons enjoyable. If I were the developers, I maybe would have had each set of keys have names that related to the individual dungeons. Like if you were in a water dungeon, then the keys would be something called like Trickle Key, Rain Key, Waterfall Key, or something. You know where I'm going with this. The other side of having an interesting world to explore is how it actually looks. Not just on a technical level, but whether or not it's creative and pleasing to the senses. I think this is where the game starts to fall short of the greats. Let me start with what I think the game does well. The sprite work on the main characters is nice. They really look like they could be some Super Nintendo classic video game heroes. Yeah! The detail and variety of animations in this play is really quite good. Like I said, I'm a sucker for super deformed characters acting out really dramatic scenes. It really gets me going. So that's all well and good, but where does the game start to falter? Let's start with the character portraits. By the end of the game, they did grow on me a bit, but at the beginning I hated them. I mean, even now, they have this weird sort of anime-ish, but not like fully anime style. It's like some weird fake anime or something. I don't even know how to describe it. It's okay, but yeah, not great. I think I actually prefer the sort of character portraits seen in Stegosoft's previous work, Arafel. They're simpler, but at least they don't look weird. And also, like I said, I do like the general look of the game, but it must be mentioned that some of these assets are taken straight from RPG Maker. This is, at its core, still a game built from the RPG Maker engine. Those people who are familiar with these games may notice some reused assets and this may kind of turn them off. It didn't bother me though. And the last nitpick I have is with the enemy designs, both in the lack in variety and quality of some of them. You really do fight a lot of them darn pirates in this game. Man, if there are any more battling pirates, I could have called this game Pirate's Quest. Looking for the booty. Nah, I'm kidding. But anyway, let's just say that some of these enemies look better than others. I do like these weird cats though. While we are talking about the presentation, let me just mention the music real briefly. The music is decent, if a bit uneven. It's all sort of non-offensive, but you can definitely tell it's not exactly a cohesive effort. Finding out that these were sourced from Audio Jungle, that seems to make sense. Overall, passable, but nothing really outstanding. There definitely are some catchy tunes in there, but overall it sounds a little bit generic to my ears. And definitely cannot hold a candle when compared to some of the giants of the genre. The sound effects are also decently done. Lots of slishy slashy noises and boomy gunshots. No complaints there. I have to mention that there is no voice acting. To be honest, this doesn't bother me too much, as almost all the SNES and PS1 classic RPGs lacked voices and I ain't hearing no one, including myself, complaining about it. Before we move on to the meat of the gameplay, I have one last thing to say about the presentation overall, and that is, when it comes to making a quest that stands up to the greats, it's the little things, baby. These little things make a big difference. For instance, when you get into a battle, there isn't much of a transition. There's like this weird little click noise. It's awkward. Compare this to something like Final Fantasy II for the SNES. Notice a difference? I can tell you which one I prefer. Or when the bosses die, it looks something like this. That's pretty good, but it ain't this. Or just in general, the look of the battles. They're pretty good, but there's something off about them. I mentioned the weird enemy designs, but overall the battles sometimes look strange and I'm not sure if they jive well with the rest of the game. The main character sprites look pretty cool, but they're on top of these lower res pictures. And there seems to be a lot of slowdown when using some of the flashier, cooler looking effects. Plus, the animation just seems a little stiff or something. It doesn't look bad per se, it's just uneven, I guess. The battles themselves are quite well done. You can tell a lot of playtesting was done here to make a balanced, challenging experience. It's all just very solid. Basically, all of your moves take MP. Some characters regain MP faster than others, and each character has their own set of moves. It all works decently enough, and the game tries to encourage you to use all your characters by introducing a fatigue mechanic. To be honest, on normal difficulty, I didn't have to pay too much attention to characters' fatigue. I cycled my guys in and out here and there, but for the most part, I found the most effective party was Rowan, Karina, and Ariel, which also happened to be the first 3 characters you obtain. My main gripe with the battles once again goes back to variety or lack thereof. If you look at the character skill trees, this is it. That's all there is. Each character has a handful of moves and you will use them over and over and over again. There's no spell learning crystals or materia, no super secret techniques, nothing like that. Basically, the game gives you a set of moves and you're expected to use them throughout the whole game. There are a handful of double techniques and you will uncover different strategies as you obtain more guys, but overall it's a whole bunch of sameness. Like I said, the game balance is good, so at least there's that. Overall, the sense of progression is decent and a bit of grinding is available and helpful in a few portions of the game. I have to also mention that all the characters share experience and skill points. That means all characters are the same level. I feel this is both convenient but also a bit limiting. I think that kind of sums up my opinion of the gameplay. It's solid and well done, but very limited in scope. Having said that, it is a testament to the game's strengths that everything doesn't become boring. I was genuinely hooked the whole time due to the vast game world, interesting setting, and characters. The pacing is also on point. When playing a good quest, this is pivotal. If a game has a strong forward progression in its pacing, one will feel invested in the journey. You will want to see what happens next, what the next town may offer, what the next plot point will be, or what the next dungeon will bring. Rise of the Third Power succeeds in this area. It helps that the plot enhances a sense of urgency. I just dig the behind enemy lines on a covert mission vibe that most of the game has. I don't know if it's because I have such fond memories of moments like Locke's mission in Figaro in Final Fantasy VI, or Shinra Tower in Final Fantasy VII, or any number of moments like this in JRPGs, but I find it to be an intriguing setup for quests. Granted, it doesn't always work out. Final Fantasy XIII had a setup sort of like this, and that game was a little bit disappointing.
Now, what's our motto? Thou see you're no match for Nora!
But overall, this scenario makes me feel closer to my party and team. It's hard to explain that exact feeling I'm describing. The Rise of the Third Power gave me that feeling. Just me and my dudes. Up against the world. Trekking across the earth. So in the end, despite its inherent flaws, I would almost wholeheartedly give Rise of the Third Power a recommendation. After all, you can't always judge a game by its by-the-numbers, cold hard facts. Some of the most beloved games of all time are full of fundamental imperfections. Take Xenogears, for instance. The game has an abbreviated second disc, a less than stellar translation, and rather imbalanced combat. Yet, I can't think of another game from that era that gives me that same feeling. Having said that, I can say that some of Rise of the Third Power's shortcomings do prevent it from being as good as it could have been, and because it's a game that is partially relying on our own nostalgia for 16-bit classics, its failure to live up to their standards in certain areas that causes quite a clear juxtaposition between itself and the masterpieces it's trying to emulate. It is a good quest though. I really enjoyed my time with the game. For a game created mostly by two people, it is a resounding success. I look forward to seeing what they could possibly do with a bigger budget and team. Rise of the Third Power is a good story with good pacing and good characters, but is just a bit rough around the edges due to its limited development team. That's about as succinctly as I can sum it up. It has a lot of heart. It may not be one of the greats, but it's definitely one of the goods.